Any questions, Doc?
So let's walk this through. Are you talking about the U.S. Supreme Court or the Rhode Island Supreme Court?
U.S. Supreme Court did establish the open fields doctrine.
Which allowed law enforcement to come on your property?
Correct. The specific case that was, that's most, yeah.
Don't need the specific
Yep.
case. So if the Supreme Court says it's allowable, how does a state law disallow it?
Because we're actually establishing a law. We're saying it is a law. The Supreme Court went in, and again, the lawyers probably can explain this better than I, but generally speaking, the Supreme Court makes rulings on law. So they're saying that under the current law, whatever that may be, that the agents of the government can place field trail cams and things like that on areas of your property outside of your curtilage. Now, if we come in and establish new law, then that is now the standing practice. That is how that our law enforcement officers within the state of Rhode Island would have to operate. I don't believe this would have an impact on federal agencies, but it would have an impact on all those law enforcement agencies within the state of Rhode Island.
Because as a layman, I would just think that if a state law enforcement agency or any agency wants to put a recording device on your property, that's bounded by your property lines.
And the Supreme Court disagrees, Doc, and which is
Okay.
why I'm putting.
So
this
I think
legislation
on that basis, it's a good bill. Now, let's talk about the real question. You said on or near. What do you mean by near?
in. So my understanding, based on the conversations I've had with the lawyers that assist me in drafting this legislation, currently, if under your curtilage, if they want to record you, they still have to go ahead and apply for a warrant. So my understanding, and I think the defense attorney defense attorney in the room may be able to answer this better, but the response I got was, that is the language based on your curtilage, which is the areas that are covered by the Fourth Amendment currently, based off of the Supreme Court precedent.
So maybe it's my definitions that's incorrect. When I see on private property, I'm looking at the boundaries of your private property, and I would agree wholeheartedly that if law enforcement or any agency wanted to do any type of surreptitious recording, they would need a warrant first on your property, but not near your property,
And again,
because then that's going to hamper law enforcement.
I understand, again, when I asked that question, the answer that I got was that that's the way they generally handle it now for warrants. And again, I could be dead wrong on this because obviously I don't practice criminal law.
Neither do I.
So, that's my understanding of that language, is that's the language that is used to define when law enforcement needs to get a
Law
warrant now.
enforcement is hampered enough, and I'm sure you don't want to hamper them
Well,
further.
and that's what I'm saying. My understanding is this would be parallel to the current areas in which they need to acquire the warrant. So this just parallels the same language, and again, I don't want to keep arguing the point if I'm dead
No.
wrong.
No, and I don't want to belabor the point either. My point is, on your property is one thing, near your property is another. Because near your property is going to be very necessary for law enforcement to do their job. So, if this bill does have legs, and I hope part of it does, I would like to see some type of definition and/or delineation of the terms, so we know exactly what we're dealing with and how we're dealing with it. Thank you.
Yes, Jason.
You need a warrant to go in the house, obviously. You need a warrant to go into the house, obviously. You need a warrant to go past the property line. You need a warrant if you're going to observe things from outside the property line that aren't noticeable to the casual observer, and think like thermovision looking through the walls.
Yep.
Right? And that's kind of the curtilage piece a little bit. You need a warrant for all that stuff. And I like this bill in some respects because right now, there's nothing to stop the police from putting a surveillance camera in the house next door, looking at just the front yard of this target's house and recording 2 weeks of activity, because it's, the law hasn't quite caught up with electronics, you know, and the question for the courts is that kind of surveillance reasonable under the Fourth Amendment? You know, you can't reasonably put a cop out there with his eyes open 24/7, you know, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a month to watch the comings and goings, but you can put a camera out there. So is that a search? That's the question that this bill, I think, would answer. This bill would require a warrant. You may want to think about doing some carve-outs for cameras that are in place for non-criminal investigation activities. Think Cranston and all their brand-new traffic cameras.
Yep.
That kind of thing.
Jose?
So I would say, Doc, based on that, I would say that my interpretation is wrong, and that what you're saying is correct, that it is a change, just so that I'm acknowledging that, and like I said, I'll take into consideration looking at that language in the legislation going forward. Yep. Yep. Mhm.
Get Jose. Representative Batista?
Thank you. First and foremost, Representative Place, I think it's a good bill. I think there's some opportunity for bipartisanship here. Looking forward to working with you on it. Just wanted to respond to a couple of the points made by Representative Corvese. I think a lot of times with the Supreme Court or U.S. Supreme Court law, what it will do is establish a floor and not a ceiling. And so, for example, if, you know, the drinking, just as an example, if the drinking age is 21, that's the floor. A state could, in theory, set it higher than that, but it could not set it below that. And so I think some of the case law that Representative Place is talking about doesn't necessarily say that states can't do this, but it establishes a floor for what's the minimal permissible. And that's just what I think. And second, I would say it's an interesting distinction that you're making with regard to can law enforcement put stuff on your property versus near your property. Obviously, technology is advancing every year, or over every decade, et cetera. And I think what we're talking about, there's a way for law enforcement to basically circumvent the warrant requirement. If they have, for example, if there's something that they could not see or hear unless they were on your property, but now technology makes it such that they can post it, you know, a few yards away and have that same effect, that would basically be something you're concerned about. And I think that's part of what Representative Place is trying to work on. And so I'm encouraged to see this. I know we have a lot of conversations here about the First Amendment. I know my brother here is a firm believer in the Second Amendment. I personally think that this amendment, the Fourth Amendment, is just as sacred as everything else that we talk about, and I'm glad that we have an opportunity to have this conversation.
Representative Vella Wilkinson?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Going along Representative Place with my brother, Representative Baptista, I was wondering if your bill would also capture the technology that's known as a stingray, where you could buy a piece of spy hardware that would act as a legitimate cell tower, and then it pulls the cell phone calls within a certain distance of any of the cell phones that are being used. Now, I know that you say audio and video recorders, but I don't know if a stingray falls under that specific category.
Based on my intent for the legislation, no, it didn't, which is why, if you look farther down, we've got the stingray legislation on here, and I believe I'm the number 2 on it. So I think, based on the way my envision of the legislation, my legislative intent for it was traditional audio video recordings. The only tweak I made to last year's version of the bill was anything that transmits as well, because I just dealt with stuff that recorded. So I didn't, that would actually wind up being something that would, you know, if this were to pass, it'd be adjudicated in a court of law. It wasn't my intent, but who knows?
I know that when, is it all right if I continue, Chairman? I know that when Leader Filippi had come here earlier in the session and he was speaking about that type of equipment, the Stingray, we were under the impression that the Stingray was something that was a commercial grade piece of electronics equipment. And I've since found out that you can actually purchase it commercial off the shelf at Amazon. So anyone would be able to pick it up and capture whatever you're transmitting over your cell phone.
So as I sit back and think about the two pieces, the Stingray is more about generally broad-based collection of large quantities of data over a wide area, whereas my legislation is more fixated on specific
Singular.
pieces of property and individuals under surveillance.
Okay.
And I think, in my personal opinion, there is a difference between the approach to it, and I think the Supreme Court, or, the courts have looked at it the same way.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, John? No, Doc already asked one question, but
I'm sure you had the attorneys look at this, Mr. Chair, and it's very interesting. It's certainly something that I kind of like. I just would like to know if it would pass constitutional muster, because, we saw what happened with Robert Kraft, with his particular issue. I mean, as soon as I heard what happened, I said, this is a problem, because there's people that walked into that place of ill repute, or whatever you want to call it. I'm sure they were innocent as the driven snow. And I knew that that would be problematic, that case, that people want to know why I got thrown out. Well, I got thrown out because, maybe Mr. and Mrs. Jones went in there, legitimately wanted to get a massage, and what happened? They got caught. Were they filmed nude? Were they, and that's kind of embarrassing. So I have a big problem with that. But I'm sure that, we have certainly very competent counsel, and I think to put together a quick memorandum, maybe a page or two with the keynote cases. I think this should not be a hard one to see if, my concern, would it pass constitutional muster? That's my only concern. I mean, I praise you for, doing what you're thinking, and I agree with Representative Baptiste. This is something that I think we can hold in kumbaya on this one, I think, in my humble opinion. My only concern is, would it pass constitutional muster? That's my only thing, because, but other than that, it's a good piece of legislation, I think. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Kovesi.
My last comments on this, I think this bill has a lot of merit. I think it touches upon an issue that should be further explored. And unfortunately, there are many study commissions in this place, and I'm not dissuading you in any way, but with some of the comments that Representative Knight made, with the way technology advances, okay, whether it be an outgrowth of this bill or another bill, this is the type of subject matter that lends itself to a true study commission, not only audiovisual, but all other aspects of technology as it applies to the Fourth Amendment. So, just throwing it out there. Again, I'm not saying this to dissuade you or to say, well, turn this bill into a study commission. But this type of subject matter is something that would be for a true study commission, in any event.
Any other questions of the sponsor?